Welcome to the Homeschool Together podcast. Where one working mom and a stay-at-home dad help you navigate the nuts and bolts of the growing and dynamic world of homeschooling.
With a focus on early learners, like me.
All the ins and outs of building and maintaining your homeschool life.
Homeschool.
Find out tips and tricks to make things like this easier.
I'm reading.
And ultimately, enjoy educating your kids. And what's that last thing?
Have fun together. Did I do good, Daddy?
Yeah, you did, sweetie. Good job.
Hi there and welcome to Homeschool Together.
Get out of here. Get out of my thing.
Well, I think I should do the intro today.
Go ahead,
because
do the intro.
This is the second part of our garden school extravaganza.
Listen, I'm not paid nothing for nothing. I show up here, I get to do my intro, and then you talk for 40 minutes.
Well, and today I think I should do the intro because you're going to be the one to talk for 40 minutes because this is where your Master Gardener badge is going to shine. We spent our first half of our garden school episode talking, or a two-part series, talking about gardening with kids and all the great educational opportunities and some things to remember about working with kids in the garden and growing food with kids. And today, for all those of you who are wondering about what should I grow, what size garden should I have, what should I plant, the Master Gardener, Matt, is on tap here to answer all of our questions.
Grow pizza.
Grow pizza.
Pizza plants.
Sign me up.
Sign me up, yeah. Organic pizza plants.
Before we get into Matt's vast area of plant-based knowledge, please go out there and leave us a review if you get a chance. We would love to see that. It helps new people find the show. If you haven't subscribed, hit the subscribe button. And if you have a great idea for a show, or you want to be on here and be interviewed, or you want us to reach out to a specific creator because you would just love to hear what they have to say on the show, reach out to us. We're always accessible. homeschooltogetherpodcast@gmail.com. So, or any of the social medias. I'm on them all the time, way too much. So please just reach out to us. We love hearing from people. Or if you just really like the show and you want to say that you like it, we like hearing that too. So
that's why you're not allowed to do the intro, because it makes me look bad. It makes me look bad. Like, everybody's sitting here going, why are they letting that doofus ever talk? You know, it's like, what's the point of this guy?
You know, I feel
just let him edit the podcast. Let Ariel just talk.
I stepped into the guest host role, and I feel kind of comfy in the seat.
I'm not going to say, but you got big shoes to fill.
All right. So without any further eloquence, as one of my favorite movies would say, let's get started. So we talked about gardening with kids. We talked about all the educational aspects. Yeah. All right. The people are convinced. What do we grow?
Well, so this is always the $10,000 question. People dive into it. They pull out the seed catalog. They see all the pretty flowers.
I love the seed catalog.
I know. You get your Johnny seeds from Maine. It comes in.
It's like dreams.
And you're like, what am I going to grow this year? All these vegetables look so good. And I have these visions of eating 20 pounds of vegetables for every dinner. And, that just never happens.
That sounds bloaty.
It's very bloaty, yes. I'm going to grow the best spaghetti squash in the world. And so you get all these ideas, and there's these beautiful plants, and there's all these great things. I'm always a big fan of kind of the keep it simple thing, where grow what you eat what you grow. That's the biggest piece of advice I can ever give to anyone who's looking to do kind of a produce or vegetable garden. Now, the people who've been gardening for a long time and they're starting to grow heirlooms and they're saving their own seeds, those people know what they're doing. But for a lot of us, we're getting into our first, maybe second or third year of gardening, and we're struggling, or you're getting into your first year and you're like, oh my gosh, I don't know what to grow. I don't know what to do. The biggest thing is to look back on what you guys like to eat, especially the kids, because you're including these kids into this environment, into this experience of growing food. And the biggest thing is they want to be able to consume what they're eating as well. And you want to look back and say, what do my kids like to eat? For a lot of us, we have some kids who have some really, weird food choices. They only like to eat potatoes, or they only like to eat white stuff, or, whatever that might be. You want to look back and kind of see what does your family eat? What do you guys like to eat? Maybe pick one or two other things. Like, for example, Ariel's like, I want to have more salads. I want to, grow my own salads, which is great. So the kids can grow salads for mom or dad and things like that. But think about what your family likes to eat and grow that, and grow a small amount of those things, not a ton, meaning variety wise. Don't say like mommy likes to eat lettuce greens, let's grow 15 different types of kale. No, not necessary. Absolutely not necessary. So focus on something very simple, very easy. I always like to have this adage of where you're thinking about, you're not going to grow all the produce you can to replace your entire summer's worth of, eating and vegetables. You're never going to be able to do that, especially with a lot of us who live in kind of a suburban neighborhood. We're going to be replacing maybe one vegetable, maybe a salad throughout the latter part of the summer, maybe the early second half of the summer. Maybe we can replace one or two meals of a vegetable side, right? We're not replacing everything. We're just doing a little bit. So
Yeah, that's expert mode.
yeah, that is way big time expert mode. So I would not advise that. So keep it simple, and then also grow what you eat and eat what you grow. And that's, I think, the biggest thing. I always got that off of some of the survival podcasts I used to listen to, which is store what you eat and eat what you store. And the same idea applies to the garden. Like, grow what you eat and eat what you grow. If you don't like to eat certain types of food, like we're not a big zucchini family.
Speak for oneself.
Well, I'm not a big zucchini fan, or eggplant. Like, right? We're not an eggplant family. And why would you ever grow eggplant? But there's some people who are just like, I want to grow an eggplant because it looks cool. And that's not what you want to be doing with your precious space and precious time and the precious individuals who will be involved in this. You want to make sure that you're growing something that they're excited to eat.
So we're going to grow something that we like to eat. Now, when you talk about like don't grow 15 varieties of lettuce, there are a lot of different varieties. So how do you choose? Do you choose short, long? How do you make those decisions?
I think a lot of people, when you're first getting into gardening, you want to focus on the things that take the shortest amount of time to grow. And why is that?
I like that quick satisfaction.
Yeah, it's both the quick satisfaction because you can say, okay, I get to have this thing quicker, but also you're going to run into problems. You're going to plant your lettuce greens too early, and it's going to be cold and rainy. It's Western Washington, and they're not going to germinate
Ask
very
us how
fast.
we know.
Yeah, they're not going to germinate very fast. Or if you're transplanting starts, maybe your starts, get a little sunburned. Because they've been inside under your fluorescent lights, and then you're putting them outside and they get a little stunted, and then you get a little cold spell and you got to cover them.
This is a detailed story. This has happened to somebody in this room before.
Things
oh my
like
gosh.
this happen. And so you want to be able to grow things that are going to cycle fast. The other thing I like about cycling fast crops, especially things like lettuce greens, they're so rewarding because you can cut them pretty much at any time. And we'll talk a little bit later about how early you can actually cut them from, say, a microgreen all the way to a head lettuce. Those have different, life cycles of what you're harvesting. But especially with like the bed of like cut greens, what's really cool about them is once you get them up to a certain height, maybe say 3 or 4 weeks, the 21, the 28, the 36 day time frame, you can begin to trim them back, and then they will regrow off the same stems. And so the idea of cut greens is a really great place to start because you can get like easy instant wins. Especially with the kids, it's something they can get out there and cut all the time, and you can go out, send them out there like 2 or 3 times a week. Especially if you have a nice bed of lettuce greens, of cut greens, mixed greens, arugula, spinach, things of that nature. And when you get these cut greens, man, you can like really enjoy having a salad every single night and have that satisfaction of being able to grow that. So I would always focus on short-term crops, things like corn, things like pumpkins, things like watermelon. Those take a long time, very long time. Now, there's always short versions of every one of those crops, and you can find them and whatnot. But for most people, if you go shop at like Lowe's or Home Depot or Walmart, or if you're getting some, the seed packet off the wall, those are going to be longer term crops. And so I would try to shy away from those for a couple of reasons. They tend to take up more space. Especially things like tomato, any type of vining plant like a watermelon or a cantaloupe or a pumpkin or something of that nature, where it's meant to sprawl along the ground. You're going to immediately consume your garden space, and it's going to be overflowing, and then you're going to have maintenance issues, and it's going to kind of look ratty, and that might be kind of a negative like aesthetics version of an aesthetics issue for you. So tight, small, containable crops. Beans are really, really good. Any type of long bean, type of like a snap bean. Anything like that, they grow really fast. They're very vigorous growers. They can trellis up, so you don't have that issue of sprawl. So I like to contain small, contained kind of trellising crops and things that you can cycle fast. I think those are the easiest, biggest wins. A lot of us will eat beans. A lot of us will eat snap peas. We'll toss it into a stir fry. We'll eat them with some ranch dressing. We'll have a short salad. Those are really easy wins for a lot of home gardeners that you're just getting out. You're just starting off. Those are super easy wins for people.
And so would you say with this we should start with, should people start with seeds or with starts, or is it worth the extra money to pay for the tomato starts and things, or should we
I think
go whole hog, go seed?
So I think in the end it's always the same of depending on what you want to do. I think from the standpoint of an educational experience, you should do a mixture of both. Most of us will want to grow some tomatoes, like, I want to do some San Marzanos because I want to do tomato sauce. I'll get some tomato plants. I don't necessarily think you should be growing your tomato plants from seed. They take a long time to do that. Like 3 or 4 weeks, you gotta have a nice apparatus, some lights to grow that inside. Then you have to transplant, and then maybe you have to tent for a little while, depending on where you're located in the country and what zone you're in. That can be complex. A lot of times when you get to these larger plants like tomatoes, you can just go to your local home store and get a bucket of tomato plants for pretty low amount of money, right? And setting up the whole apparatus of growing your seeds indoors will probably outstrip the cost of just going to buy 10 tomato plants.
So are those things that they sell as starts then usually plants that would have longer durations from seed? So is this a great way to say, like, well, yeah, I get all the short stuff like lettuce, but I want to grow something longer. So if I buy a start, I can cut that time down,
well,
right?
the question is if you go from seed, you have to have the infrastructure inside your house to begin to do that, right? Planting them in a little Jiffy pellet or even into a soil cube or anything of that nature, it's going to require infrastructure once you get germination. So you can do that for the first maybe 4 or 5 days, but then once those first cotyledon leaves are punching through the soil, you got to get light on them. And a lot of times putting them in a windowsill or in a window is okay as long as you have good sun. Maybe you have a nice southerly facing window that gets full sun through the day. That's okay. But for a lot of people, maybe they don't have that ideal situation, or they don't want to have their tomato starts sitting in with their kids in the living room where the dog plays and all that type of stuff. You may have to go get some infrastructure like shelving with some fluorescent lights that have nice temperature rating on them to allow you to, let the starts go. But even then, when you transplant them outside, you're going to lose about a week or so because they're going to have to acclimatize to the outside. They're going to get a little bit of potential for burning. So you may actually have to acclimatize them outside for a day or two, bring them in, out, bring them in and out, and then you can plant them in the ground. So you're looking at this pretty complex, right? And I think from the standpoint of starting, you want to go back to it, keep it simple. If I just go and buy a bucket from Bonnie's, that it's, San Marzanos, cost me $10, and it's a pretty nice big start. I can throw that in the ground. It's already acclimatized. It's ready to go. It might take a few days for it to acclimatize to your pH in your soil, but it's ready to go, and I don't have to have all that infrastructure. I think from the standpoint of things that are a little bit faster, like lettuce greens, if you're going to do some head lettuce, that's something worth starting on the inside if you want. But even then, if you're going to do mixed greens, a cutting bed of mixed greens, you just want to direct seed those.
Would it be good to do things from seed, like carrots and things that you would seed maybe in the winter? You could do those from seed?
No, again, most things for like carrots or lettuce greens, you're probably going to want to direct sow those. Carrots being probably a really good example of that, and especially if you want to go into winter gardening, and we can talk a little bit about that later. But those are things you want to probably direct sow, especially into your bed. Because they're such a short season crop. A lot of carrots, especially if you have really good soil and you get a shorter version of carrot, like maybe like you're getting like that kind of looks like a radish carrot, like a round body, not a long neck type of carrot. You can get, a 60-day turnaround on those. And that's really, really, you don't need to do starts on that point. Like those really short crops should really just be directly sown into the soil. And again, that just makes it easier for you as the starting gardeners, that you can just directly sow that. You may have to put some like row cover cloth on top of it to just kind of protect them. But other than that, it's pretty much straight into the soil. So your bigger plants, I would just say, if you're going to start out, just go to the store and buy them. and then, do the direct seeding for things that are a little bit shorter.
Okay,
And
so
then,
short duration direct seed, and the bigger, longer look for starts.
and then the middle ground around that is if you're doing any type of educational thing where you want to show plant life cycle, buy a bean seed, buy some beans, legumes, any type of legume, and do Jiffy pellets with those. And they're just disposable, right? You can do beans inside just to see how it grows and just to show your learner. Like I'm not against starting seeds on the inside, but just maybe put that towards as a learning thing. I did start sunflowers last year inside in the windowsill. It did really well, and they grew really well. That was really nice too, because sunflowers
we transferred them outside.
sunflowers are very vigorous. They're very quick growers. They germinate very fast. You can get a bunch of Jiffy pellets and put sunflower seeds in them. They're very rewarding because the kids love them because they can get really tall, especially if you get some of the mixed colored ones. They get some really beautiful colors, fuchsias and yellows and oranges and reds, and really beautiful colors. So you can kind of just assorted sunflower seeds into Jiffy pellets to kind of do the, we're watching seeds grow type of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're really just trying to say, I'm going to do my gardening, I really want to grow food for my family, I would focus on direct seeding crops and then buying starts. It's probably the easiest way to go up front. And then you can start playing with seed starts, next year. A lot of times, depending on where you are in the zone, what zone you're in, as of now, it's just the end of March, you probably would have already had to get them started, especially like a tomato plant or some other long season crops that you want to bring out there. Because if you think about it in a couple...
So we're still good to start with a start now. We just wouldn't do seeds now.
Yeah, probably. Yeah. But even right now, like end of March, I don't even know if most people are planting at this point. Some people are, some people in better zones than us, but we're still holding off until, we can't get our tomato plants probably reasonably into the ground until May, right? And even then, when we do get them into May, you're going to want to put a cage around them and you're going to want to cover them because it's just so damp and so cool. You're just going to get a lot of mold issues if you just leave them out.
I see. So we talked about short, we talked about longer duration, starting from starts. Yeah. What about herbs? What do you recommend with herbs? Do we do starts? Do we direct seed? How do we keep them inside the windowsill so we can use them and cut them into all my wonderful dishes?
So for the standpoint of starts with herbs, I go directly to the big box store and you buy the ones you like. Overwhelming majority of us who are cooking are not very sophisticated cooks. We don't need, sweet tarragon or whatever, type of thing. We want to have a rosemary bush. We want to have some oregano. We want to have some thyme. We want to have those basic herbs that we all know and like. Maybe some lemon balm if you want to do some hand stuff, some like hand creams, salves type of thing. But those are all wonderfully hardy. They're so hardy that you just buy the start, put them in a spot. At the end of the year, they're going to be a nice little bush. The following year, they're going to be so big, they're going to be annoying, and they're really a set it and forget it thing. So one of those type of things, I would just go and buy the things you enjoy. Now, if there's a perennial herb that you really, really love, that's very more obscure, obviously you're going to want to start that from seed. Go ahead and get that started now. Put them into a Jiffy pellet. Once they get big enough and the roots start poking through, transplant them into maybe one of the larger square Jiffy pellet pots, and then you can transplant them outside. Those are cold hardy. Those are perennial. Those are things you can put into the ground now. Things like basil, depending on how, like for example, you can always get basil at the big box stores, but the one thing that we always like to do with the fresh rolls, we do fresh rolls, is
Thai basil.
You need Thai basil. And unless we go all the way down to the, one of the Asian food stores down in like, about a half hour from here, to get big bunches of Thai basil, sometimes when we want to make it, we don't have access to it. So having Thai basil outside, I don't see that very often at the big box stores. So, planting Thai basil is something maybe you may want to start from seed. But that's an example of something that maybe your family eats. Grow what you eat what you grow, and maybe that's something you want to grow. Things like mint, things like all the mints and
be careful with the mint. It grows.
Yeah, you definitely want to containerize those if you possibly can, or if you have an area that's kind of sacrificial in the back and you want to make that into like, a lawn of mint, you can do that. But I really like to contain mint. It does get out of control. It does get a little wild. It's hard to contain. And so definitely, again, that's something you probably don't want to do from a start, because a lot of these herbs are so easily you can divide them so easily that you just buy the starts, get enough of them for 1 year, and then you're going to have more herbs than you ever want to do.
I see. Okay, great. So we talked short-term, long-term herbs,
Yep.
fruit. Let's talk. I love fruit.
So I always like to break fruit into two different things. Obviously, you're going to have your bush, your kind of your ground variety of fruit. Well, maybe into three varieties. So you have your ground-based fruits, very classic strawberries. I am a big fan of strawberries. I think strawberries are a wonderful crop to grow. They are very hardy
Delicious.
and they're delicious, and kids love them. So you basically have your different types of variety. You have your once bearing, twice bearing, and then you have your ever bearing. I'm a big fan of ever bearing strawberries, and
Because there's always strawberries to
I'll
eat.
tell you why. Yeah, so you're not going to get as big of a strawberry. Those are maybe your once a year bearing, or sometimes your twice bearing strawberries tend to be pretty large. I think the everbearings tend to be the most flavorful. They tend to pack the most punch. They tend to be a little bit smaller. I'll put a link in the show notes here for Norse, Nourse Farms. And I have a variety there that I really like is called Seascape. I planted these. They were very, very vigorous. And they put off, after that first year, we actually got a crop the first year. We got the starts, put them in the ground. We got our crop that first year towards the end of the year. Very small, very minor. That second year was unbelievable.
Mm-hmm.
We started getting strawberries in June and we had them all summer long. And to think about being able to go out all the time, pull strawberries off plants, it's such a cool experience, because normally we go to the store, or if you go to the U-Pick farms around here, or if you go to the farmers markets and you see strawberries, they're only in for a very narrow period of time, the local fresh strawberries. Otherwise, you got to get the stuff shipped down from California, Mexico, and then in the winter, it's all the stuff from South America, and down in, I think Chile does a lot of strawberries. That is if you're thinking about environmental issues and whatnot, that can be a negative thing. I love the idea of getting an ever-bearing strawberry in the ground in a nice big area and let them produce like crazy. The one thing you're going to have to do is obviously you're going to have to net and protect. So I love the idea of an ever-bearing strawberry. Seascape's a good example of that. You can try different varieties as well. I love them. They kind of had a fleshy red interior. A lot of times with the big strawberries from California, they grow them like the size of apples now. It's kind of ridiculous.
Yeah,
But
they just don't taste like much.
They do. They have this kind of like, I don't know. It's too fleshy, and all the flavor tends to be on the outside, and the white fleshy interior tends to be kind of blandish.
Yeah.
These Seascapes are just amazing, and I think all the everbearings I've heard are really, really tasty. Those are the ones I have experience with, so that's why I recommend. After that, you get into kind of the bushing fruit. We're looking at blueberries. We're looking at raspberries. There's other kind of exotic things like goji berries and things like that. And if you get into kind of the permaculture spaces, which we'll talk about a little bit later, you'll see some other more unique fruits that kind of can bring in some other type of macro and micronutrients they can pull out of the soil. If you're looking for vitamin C replacements because, you live in the Pacific Northwest and we really can't grow citrus out here unless you bring it into the winter into your house, like a Meyer lemon or something like that. We really can't do citrus. Okay, well, maybe staghorn sumac can be that alternative to you and that type of stuff. There are a lot of unique bushing type of berry-ish type of plants, so you want to start to think about that. I like a good raspberry bush. They produce really heavily. They're really tasty. You can store them really, really easily. If you net them correctly, you won't get a lot of bird damage on them. Blueberries are another good example. This region for us is huge into blueberries. We're one of the bigger blueberry region producing areas of the world. Blueberries are huge here. They do really well. Easy to get into the ground. We have a ton of varieties that grow really well. You can do an early season, mid-season, and late season. Depending on what you're looking for, you can have blueberries for months if you set it up correctly the way you plant your plants. That's why I like those. Next is you got kind of the larger fruiting trees. I like the idea of getting fruit trees in the ground as soon as possible. They do take a lot longer. You can get around that by using some of the dwarfing varieties. A lot of the big box stores now are carrying dwarfing or semi-dwarf varieties of like apple trees and pears and things of that nature. They put off a heavy crop based on the size of the space. So if you have kind of a space constrained garden, like if you're like a small backyard or maybe even a patio type of garden, you can get those into a big pot. They do really well. Only problem with that is they're kind of exposed. A lot of times with the bigger fruiting trees, they have kind of a built-in canopy that protects the fruit. Those guys are exposed. They do have a lot of branches. They're always at risk of breaking, so you may want to trellis those. You want to kind of get into the espalier type of thing where you want to trellis your fruit trees around. That's another option. I always like to get those in early. Again, Grow what you eat what you grow. Don't grow a kumquat or whatever. If your family doesn't eat persimmons, if we don't like those things, don't plant those things. If your family likes apples, go get an apple tree. And don't get an apple tree. Okay. Most people need an apple tree in the backyard because most families like to eat apples. Don't get an apple that is the same type of apple that is in the big box stores. You want to grow apples that are climatized to your region, because a lot of times different areas have different weather patterns. They can have different diseases. You can definitely find a local cultivar club and you can get grafted starts for pretty cheap. Definitely look online for that. Look on Craigslist. Craigslist is a really great place. I know in the Pacific Northwest we can get really good fruiting starts. Blueberries, raspberries, in gallon pots. Also apple trees. We can get really, really cheap online. People are just in their backyard. They're just grafting and propagating, and you can get a really nice, really cheap. Get a couple trees and really have a good time at that. Do watch out. Some of those apple trees can grow really big, but that takes a long time to get there. So
and you do need multiple apple trees, right, for cross-pollination?
Yeah, you do be aware of some plants need some cross-pollination. A lot of times with the bushing berries, you don't necessarily need that. With the apple trees, you will. So
yeah, we have apple trees in our backyard. We make applesauce every year. Our kids love the whole applesauce making process.
I kid you not. It's one of the greatest things you can do is you have a nice medium-sized apple tree in the backyard, or maybe one or two. At the end of the year, you get like 60 pounds of apples.
That's a lot of apples.
And you go and you get the old style 1800s peeler that you can see online, crank peeler.
It's great.
And then you just boil them all off, throw a little cinnamon, a little bit of brown sugar, and you make applesauce and freeze it for the winter. Apples are really rewarding. You can take all these ugly looking apples that you probably wouldn't really eat, and you can turn them into applesauce, and it's super tasty, and the kids love them. So definitely. So you got the trees, you got the bushes, and you got the ground variety. I would really focus on, because fruit trees take a long time. Obviously, berry bushes, they take about 2 years to establish, but fruit trees take a long time. You want to get those in as early as possible. Strawberries are really rewarding. Get those in the ground, get those into pots, get those into raised beds now, so you can begin to, reap the benefits of those.
So if we're talking about like first foods to start with, you're thinking strawberries,
apples,
lettuce greens, do some apples, some basic herbs.
Yep.
And for vegetable, what would you recommend for just like a simple basic place to start for vegetables?
100%. Every single family, every single garden should have potatoes.
The Irish would agree.
The Irish would all agree. And so
they're delicious.
So the natives in South America, they would all agree that potatoes are king. They are so easy to grow. They are so rewarding.
They're so satisfying to harvest.
They're so satisfying to harvest. And, unless you got some potatoes that have been sprayed at the store, if you get the organic potatoes, you can just go ahead and throw those in the ground and they'll just start growing. That's amazing. The potatoes, we all know, because we have a sack of potatoes in our pantry, we all know how much they want to grow. And it's really, really, it's such an easy crop to grow. They do take a little bit of time, but if you hill your potatoes correctly, I'm not a lot of us will have seen the Facebook thing of somebody, growing potatoes in like a wire rack or a wire kind of round with hay and stuff like that.
Yeah, or a trash can.
Yeah, or an old trash can or something. I'm not a big fan of that. I don't think I think the benefits outweigh the time and effort and costs with materials. Just put some potatoes in a raised bed, hill them up nicely, give them space to grow, chase them as they grow, keep hilling up as they grow up higher and higher. And then you can begin to harvest, even though the plant's still growing, you can dig out and actually harvest early potatoes and use them while the plants are still growing, right? So it's a crop that is not, why I like potatoes is that it's something you can harvest, you can kind of slightly harvest, and then you can then winterize and leave them in the ground, or you can store them inside. They're just a really, really great crop. They're so easy to grow. Kids will love them because they're just saying, throw the potato in the ground. You don't even have to do the cut thing where it's, letting the eyes grow. Man, potatoes are so bulletproof. You just toss them in the ground. They're so easy to grow. And what's really nice is if you have kind of a potato that you like, say at your special foods market or something of that nature, like a fingerling tomato or some type of really odd looking purple tomato or potato, man, you can absolutely grow those. Those are so much fun.
Yeah, they really are. Okay, a lot of good things to eat that sound delicious. But what if we just want things that are pretty? I just want flowers and things.
Flowers are actually so easy to grow because, well, they do a couple things, right? Number one thing is they're beautiful. there's something you can put on your kitchen table. Friends come over, you have some cut flowers, you can put them in there. They're really gorgeous. I love sunflowers because they're just so big and beautiful, and they can be, really fun. And also they give you nice seeds if you get a seeding variety that you can store seeds, and that's obviously a nice, cool thing to do. But the other thing they do is if you're doing anything else other than flowers, they draw in so many great pollinators, and especially if you're, you kind of have maybe an area where there's a lot of bees or mason bees, or you have like a fruit tree that needs to get pollinated. Putting in flowers is a great thing to do. You can contain them really nicely. Pick which ones you like. I'm not really a big flower guy or kind of a perennial flower guy. That's for the other side of the house. I'm more of into the produce side of things, but I'm a big fan of sunflowers. I got aerial sunflowers the first time we went on a date. It's always been sunflowers. So I'm a big fan of those. Grow those. You can grow the mammoth sunflower that goes like 15 feet tall or whatever it is. You can do that
just to see if you can.
Just to see if you can, and you'll be that person who has the sunflower out the top of their house. That's great. I like the kind of the mixed color sunflowers. They're really beautiful. They also throw off a lot of heads, so you can harvest along the way, and so you can have sunflowers kind of all summer long. That's kind of a thing that I like to do if you're going to do flowers.
All right, so lots of ideas of what to grow, but how do we actually grow something?
So I think the thing is you have to decide what your sensibilities are. Obviously you can go get a box, a bag of grow mix from Home Depot or Lowe's. Come home, put the raised bed mix, dump it into your raised bed, dump in a bunch of Miracle Grow, and everything is going to be.
Sounds easy. That
sounds really easy. You can they even sell compost now, mushroom compost, regular compost. Really, really nice stuff. If you don't want to do kind of the chemical based, agriculture, you can do the composting side of the house as well. Setting up composting bins is a really cool thing. You're going to have a lot of excess material coming out of your garden, leaves, produce, stems, vines, whatever. So setting up a little bit of a compost bin and like maybe a wire bin, getting kind of that wire garden fencing, kind of the heavy wire garden fencing, making a circular composting bin, and just tossing all your stuff in there is really nice, especially if you're going to think about what you're going to be doing for the following year. Throwing your grass clippings in there, things of that nature. It's a really cool way to do that, kind of getting into the idea of composting. I am a big fan of doing what is easiest. So doing a mix of kind of raised bed garden soil. So I'm just assuming everybody's going to start a raised bed. They're not going to go and buy a big tiller and till half their backyard. Yeah,
they're going to be growing in some sort of container, whether it's a raised bed.
Yeah, you're not going to go buy your big, I think it's the BCS tiller and chunk up your whole lawn. I'm assuming you're going to go out and buy some wood, and you're going to build a little raised bed, and you're going to toss some gardening soil into it, and you're going to put some stones around it, make it look nice, and that's what you're going to do. I would just say go get the nice gardening soil and then mix in some nice compost, maybe a little bit of the pre-treated manure bags that they have there, and then you can add in a little bit of fertilizer. Not too much, you don't need to. A lot of times just starting with a good start is really best, and then just adding in enough water throughout the year. That's, I think, the biggest problem. You don't need to continuously fertilize your plants throughout the year. A lot of times you just want to start it. And then if you're doing a kind of a sequential planting where you're actually doing multiple things, maybe then you got to think about adding some more compost to what you're doing. But for the most part, if you just start nicely, if you just start with some decent stuff, it tends to work really nice. If you want to go the more organic route, you can think about reaching out to maybe some local horse pastures, but a lot of times the horse pasture, the horse boarding facilities will not be treating organically their feed, and maybe the hay that they're using is not organic, and so maybe that's a concern for you. If you want to just go the straight organic route, the only concern about that is if you're starting organic and you're going to put a little bit more money into that, and because you're going to have to get the materials, and you're going to have to source things that are organic.
So you're talking about, you've got, the everything from the Miracle Grow, I buy it, it's got everything included in it, or I've got, options to buy compost or to buy manure.
Or you can buy the Alaska Fish Fertilizer or the whatever.
So what about safety though? Our kids they got their hands in the soil, and what's okay to use and not use? Does this depend on maybe like the age of your kids and how well they are with washing their hands and things? Or
so whenever you're applying fertilizers or any type of chemical based, not everything's chemicals. So whenever somebody says, "Oh, I don't want to put chemicals on this," or "I don't want to put chemicals in my body," it's like it always grates my ears. Everything's chemicals. Do you want to put in some engineered material that was made in, say, like a production facility onto your soil, made like a Miracle Grow type of thing or whatnot? Obviously, just read the labels. Put it on. A lot of times, it is water soluble, so it gets into the soil. It's going to, for the most part, it's going to leach out. Actually, leach into the soil for the most part, and may actually leach out. A lot of the nitrogen-based fertilizers, I think, are very, very, very short-lived. So you got to have your plants ready. The plants have to be ready for that type of stuff. That's where compost comes into play, and having good, biology within your soil, having good organics, having good bacteria, having the good ecosystem within your soil is always going to be continuously supplying your plants with what they need. But if you're going to be just dumping stuff on, you just want to be a little bit careful. You probably don't want the kids to be doing that for the most part. That's something you probably want to do. But again, if you just start with some good raised bed soil, you can either buy it from, a local guy who will have it delivered to your front driveway and dump it onto a tarp, or you can buy the bags from Lowe's or Home Depot or whatever it might be. You can easily go ahead and just, put the things into it what you need. If you're going a little bit more like beyond organic and you're getting that's maybe even permaculture thinking, your timeline is a little bit longer now. Like you're thinking longer instead of like, okay, I want to start gardening this year and I want to have, lettuce greens on my plate by June. If you're thinking like, I want to be a permaculture gardener, it's like, well, those things don't really blend and mesh. You need to think more holistically about your garden space, about what your backyard is doing. What is your ecosystem? What are you planting? What are you doing this? And what is the long-term plan? How are things going to be growing and staggering and staging through time, right? Because permaculture and some of these more elegant styles of growing tend to be space and time. They tend to be 3-dimensional, 4-dimensional in that respect. A lot of us are just trying to grow seeds, just trying to grow some lettuce greens, just trying to grow a couple tomatoes.
Yeah, it sounds like that's definitely the pro level that you really are getting into a much more bigger commitment and much more planning and money.
And again, a lot of those type of things you can do that, but maybe in the short term you do something else. Right? Just get the nice thing, get a bag of compost, mix it all really well together, maybe throw on a little fish fertilizer, get your NPK all balanced nicely, and then go ahead and start growing, right?
That sounded very complicated. So
yep.
To break it down simply, if we can buy good bags of soil, we're probably okay.
You're probably okay.
All right. So we talked about kind of the range of this being...
Unless you want to do biodynamic stuff.
Oh, let's not go there.
Some things
that are more expensive and, cheaper. And what's the cost? If a family wants to start gardening, is this a really expensive thing to get into? Or how do we do this on a budget if we're not sure if gardening is going to be our thing?
I think every family should probably have a couple of raised beds, just as a general thing. I think from the standpoint of growing tomatoes, growing some flowers, growing some herbs, I think almost every family should have something like that. And that you should almost see it as like it's a piece of, infrastructure in your backyard, whether it's, you got your umbrella, you got your hammock, you got your outdoor seating stuff, you got your, your Weber grill and all that stuff. Just consider like a couple raised beds, 2.5 by 5 feet and get a couple of them, or 2.5 by 8 feet. And get like 2 or 3 of them.
I think it's simple lumber with
lumber. Don't worry.
Soil inside, nothing too complex.
Exactly. And I would stay away from the pressure treated stuff because those chemicals can leach into the soil, and there's a little bit of a concern around that. They have these really nice cement blocks that can do the angled joints around the 4 corners, and you can actually stack them. I know Lowe's and Home Depot carry them. They're like $3 each or $2 each. So you imagine you get 4 of them.
They're concrete, right?
They're poured concrete, and they kind of have these inset.
They're like crosses.
They're like joiners. Yeah, they look like kind of like an old iron cross type of thing. And then you cut the wood, and it just slats right in. So there's no nailing, no screwing, no bracketing, and you just put it into place, and you can stack them up high. So as high as you want your raised bed, you just get more and more joiners, and you just stack them, and they're all formed to fit like Lego pieces. And then you buy an 8-foot piece of lumber, like a 2x6, and it just drops right in there, and you don't have to do any screwing, no nailing, no nothing. I think that might be the cheapest, like fastest way to go.
Mm-hmm.
lumber prices are so extreme right now. So if you have an area where there's a lumber mill or any type of lumber production, we have a lot of that here in the Pacific Northwest. We got a lot of trees out here. We have a lot of agroforestry. A lot of those lumber mills will have some excess wood in the back that they'll sell that's from a construction site that was rejected. You can go look at that. You can also look on Craigslist if you want to get some cheaper wood materials. But if you're just building about 2 or 3 raised beds, I mean, you're looking at $80, a raised bed to fill it, to get everything ready, and to get 2 of them. Now, you may not make your money back in the produce for that first year, may not even make it in the first 2 years, but it's just, I would treat it as like a piece of infrastructure in your backyard. And so just consider it like that. Other way you can go to is pots. If you're really limited in space or you kind of have a balcony, obviously container pots is a really, really nice thing. Make sure they have good drainage. If they don't, drill some holes in the bottom, make sure they're draining nicely. But pots as well, those are great for herbs, great for small dwarfing trees, fruit bushes, any type of fruiting bush, even do strawberries in that, or even just some simple produce. Like you can even do simple produce in there if you want to do beans, if you want to even just do a big tomato plant. I think you can even do it in pots, and you can bring them up off of the ground onto your patio, make it look really nice. It reduces your weeding. Obviously, watering becomes more of a concern there because with pots, you dry out your root base so fast. A lot of people like to grow up off the ground. You see these kind of raised beds up off the ground there. That's a terrible idea because the soil gets so dry so fast, and you have to water like 3 or 4 times a day. Otherwise, everything dies. Any type of wall trellising type of system, you'll see those on Facebook or Pinterest that come up. Hanging trellis, garden, those again are very water sensitive. So if you're in a water conscious area, you may want to be concerned about that. But those are other ideas where you can kind of get more compact growing and you don't have to spend as much money. You can find pots everywhere.
So these are some good ways to be affordable about it, right?
Mm-hmm.
We don't want to spend so much that it's a $78 tomato.
Exactly. So if you're going to end up spending like $500 on your whole garden for the summer, go down the road, find a local farm, and pay for a CSA. That's
right.
Probably
Community-supported agriculture.
Community-supported agriculture. You get a box of vegetables every week, and it changes throughout the season. If you're going to spend $1,000 on your backyard garden, man, just stop. Go to the local CSA, some organic local small farm that's on like 2 acres, pay for a CSA box and do that for the summer instead of growing. Because at that point, like, yes, we all pay money for the educational experience with our kids and stuff, but I don't want people to go into debt to try to build a garden.
Right.
If you're going to spend some money, if you're going to spend a lot of money on it, you might consider getting a CSA to taste a bunch of vegetables as kind of a trial period for your first year and then plan a garden for the following year. Maybe as another alternative.
So one thing that really comes into the cost aspect is how big our gardens are going to be, right?
Yeah.
We talked about containers, and those can be really small and compact, and we've got raised beds. How much should someone look for? Just 2 raised beds and a patio of pots? Is that enough?
I think 2 raised beds and a patio of pots is basic infrastructure for any type of suburban house. If you have a decent view of the sun for 6 to 7 hours of the day. If you have a nice orientation on your house, maybe a little bit longer, you can go a little bit bigger, but I think that's just basic infrastructure that everyone should probably have. It's just a great experience. It's a great thing to tend to. It's a great experience for your children to maintain something like that. So again, that's like a 2 by 8. So we're looking at 16 square feet times 2 is 32 square feet. 32 square feet. And maybe even if you throw in another one, you're looking at like 50 square feet of growing. You're not going to supply all your food for the whole year. You're not going to do that, but you may replace a vegetable once or twice a week if you have that amount of space. And obviously, a few pots here and there can add some tomatoes. If you're a family that likes cherry tomatoes, that's a great plant to grow because they constantly keep giving you more and more cherry tomatoes. That's a great thing to do, and you can do that in a nice big pot. So basics amount of space is like sub 100 square feet. I think would be very simple, very, very plain garden for most families. If you go anything larger than that and it's your first year, I would say, whoa, hold the reins, pull the reins back. That might be just a little bit too much. Don't go full whole hog on that. I would say start small, maybe 50 to 100 square feet for your first garden, and then maybe grow from there. Because at that point, you're adding even more raised beds, or you're starting to fence in a given area and you're investing in tilling and whatnot. I mean, yes, you can do the layering and mulching and all that stuff, But for most people, they're going to be like, okay, I'm going to do a 300 square foot garden. That's a big garden. And that takes a lot of time, and it's pretty difficult to have that be really successful. So that's why I'm a big fan of like a couple raised beds, a couple pots. Most people would be really happy with that.
So, what kind of, if you're talking about 50 to 100 square feet, what kind of time commitment would something like this be for a family, let's say every week? How much time, if they, put this infrastructure in, are they really looking at?
Okay, yeah. So like the biggest things for most gardens fall in the realm of protection and sustaining, right? So protection, the first thing is pests, birds, anything of that nature. I'm a big fan of kind of using not ground plastic, but fabric to protect. So it allows water and air to permeate, but it keeps a lot of bugs and birds off. Allows also light to permeate. So that's a good way to kind of keep a barrier. I do like using PVC piping as kind of a hoop style structure, and then draping your protective layer over the top and then rolling it back when you're doing work. That's a great way to kind of allow you to have a little bit less time in the garden. That's the whole idea, is that you don't want to be spending every 5 minutes chasing off a bird or going outside every day and picking up all the slugs and whatnot. You want to kind of protect your plants, but allow them to continue to grow. Next thing is watering. I'm a big fan of drip irrigation, but drip irrigation is very, very difficult to set up at first because it's so many pieces and so many parts, and I don't know how to set it all up. Just having basic watering, especially if it's a smaller garden, super easy, maybe once or twice a day. If you get a nice rain, you don't have to water for the day. Super easy to do, not a lot of work, especially if you're growing raised beds that are actually touching the soil. There's going to be a lot of water accumulated material beneath it. If you separate your raised beds from the ground mass, like the earth, with plastic, or elevate them above, you run into the risk of your water becoming a precious resource that you have to constantly keep adding. So try to limit the amount of work you have to do by keeping your plants as close to the ground as possible and protecting them. Obviously, any type of diseases or something like that can also become kind of a concern. But I'm thinking from like a standpoint of like the garden and the maintenance, walking out there when you take the dog outside to go potty, checking your garden early in the morning. Yep, everything looks good. Make sure the garden fabric is over the top and everything's looking good, or the netting is looking really good. And then going out in the middle of the day, checking on them, see if anybody's looking stressed. 5 minutes, come back inside. Maybe later in the day, you go back out 5 minutes and take a look. For the most part, it's not a lot of work. I think if you can limit it to like an hour or two a week, you're probably doing okay.
And so what about like weeding and all? That's the thing that always gets me is
especially if you
should we weed, or is it okay? Should we just accept? Should we be like, as long as they're not stifling the plants?
Yeah, as long as you're not stifling the plants, I think you're okay. You don't want them to start to flower and seed, because then you have this perennial problem of weeds. I like mulching, but be careful with mulch, because sometimes the mulch will have seeds in them, especially if you get kind of a hay mulch. You'll start growing alfalfa in your backyard and stuff like that. So be aware of that. Just make sure you have a seed-free mulch. I do like mulching. Some people like to use, obviously the newspapers and the cardboard and that type of idea. I'm not a big fan of doing that. I know the newspapers use, biodegradable safe oils and as their ink base. Totally fine. Cardboard's fine. All that type of stuff is really good. Aesthetically, I don't like how it looks. So maybe wood chips is a nice alternative. You can do that. You can, especially if you like the aesthetics of your garden, you want it to look good. You may spend a little bit extra time to make it look good. So mulching is a good thing to do to help keep the weed base down.
Right. And so is it too a lot about like catching those weeds when they're little and they're easy to pull up? That's I think the great job for little fingers.
I'm not a big fan of like bare soil. I've never been a fan of bare soil, and I think most gardeners are not a fan of bare soil. So if you have bare soil, especially like in a larger garden, mulching and covering as much as possible. Obviously some people talk about the coffee burlap sacks. It's just hard to source those repeatedly over the year and over the summer and over the growing season. Really focusing on getting a really cheap, affordable mulch that helps block the weeds as much as possible. Remember, if it's bare soil, they're getting access to water, air, and sun. And if you can take away a couple of those parameters, it hurts the weeds more. and it becomes less of a fight. So mulching is probably the biggest thing.
So are you a fan of using gardening plastic and then poking holes through the plastic to plant your plants?
So yes, I am a fan of this. There's also biodegradable mulch plastic, not plastic. It's like biodegradable row covers, things of that nature. You can get cheap plastic at the big box stores, Lowe's and Home Depot. I like that, but I still like the mulch on top of that. But then you run into the issue of what type of plastic are you using? Are you using a water permeating plastic? Is it not? Are you going to pull it off at the end of the season? There's a little bit of issue of, how are you irrigating and fertilizing your plants, getting access to the plants as well. Sometimes they can get a little, it's nice too. I like the plastic because it can give you some more heat on the root zone, which can maybe get you through some, kind of cooler parts of the year. But definitely plastic mulch is okay. But then I like the mulch on top of that, like with wood chips and stuff.
Well, definitely some good food for thought. Mm-hmm. So we know, hopefully we all have an idea now of like what we would grow, how we want to grow it, about what we think it's going to cost, what size do we want to do, raised beds or pots, the amount of commitment that we're making to these little plants.
There are some other styles of growing in your backyard that might also interest you. You may not want to be a vegetable gardener. You may want to become a backyard orchard, or maybe a backyard vineyard, or a backyard blueberry farm. Whatever that might be, there's a lot of different alternatives that you can do. Maybe just say, hey, you know what? Growing tomatoes ain't my thing, but I love strawberries. So I'm going to grow a lot of strawberries. And that can be just fine too. Doing kind of a heavy, you're not monoculturing in the more, colloquial sense of, growing corn on 1,000 acres, right? If you just want to grow one thing and you want to grow one thing good, Ariel and I call this the Chipotle model. It's like, just make a good burrito. It's like, if you just want to grow 1, 2, or 3 things really good and you don't want to diversify, that is a good plan as well. And I don't doubt that. Now, you can also get into greenhouses and high tunnels. I would say shy away from that. That's a little bit more advanced.
Pro level.
That is pro level stuff, especially if you want to go all year round. I think we're going to do a short bite here with coming up about some of my favorite gardening books. So if this is something you want to get into and you want to like start thinking about growing all year round, everyone can do that. Elliot Coleman has taught us that. Even up in Maine, you can go all year round. Michigan, I know you can do all year round. So if they can do it, Pacific Northwest can, and so can Florida and Texas and all these other places around the world, going all year round. If you don't want to grow produce, you can expand into maybe fish culture. You can get into aquaponics, but these are things that are more advanced. They cost a lot of money with infrastructure. These are things that are really, really cool. Obviously, you can get into permaculture if you want to start getting into kind of a food foresty idea, doing some guild work. But again, these are more advanced, take a longer time to implement, takes you longer time to understand the mechanics of what you're doing. Not just saying, oh, I'm just going to plant a main tree and a bunch of fruiting bushes and some low-lying vine crops, just like Bill Mollison told me to. It's understanding the philosophy behind it can take a little bit longer. So be aware of that. Also, maybe you want to get into some backyard chickens. Maybe you want to get eggs. You want to do, maybe even if you have a little bit of space, you can do a backyard couple pigs, like really expand your idea. You don't just have to do vegetables, or you don't have to do vegetables and chickens. You can just do chickens, right? So keep it simple. If your family eats a lot of eggs, maybe you might become a chicken family. Who knows? But think about what you want to do. There's a lot of different alternatives than just building a couple of raised beds and growing zucchini.
But though I think that it's fair to say that those options that you talked about, there was lots of fancy words, those are not what you should do the first year.
Absolutely not. But a lot of times
if you're just starting out.
But a lot of times people are interested in gardening and they start to get into these things that interest them. Like, oh, I want to get into organic farming, or I really like this type of farming, or permaculture really interests me, and but they also want to kind of like grow some food for themselves, and they've got to decouple some of these idealistic growing models that take a long time, that have a lot of knowledge and have a lot of learning that are required to do these things correctly, versus I just want to grow a couple tomatoes. So like you got to separate those two things, because you can do both, but one's on a longer timeline and you can do something short in the short term that can benefit your family. So that was my big mega brain dump on gardening. What was that?
Wow.
50 minutes?
Yeah, boy, that was so much information. I'm glad that you're going to add links into the show notes for all of this, so that, if there's any questions. Obviously, we went through a lot of material very quickly here, but we didn't want to just
keep
do an
it
episode.
Simple. Grow what you eat what you grow. 30 square foot raised bed across 2 raised beds and a couple pots, and you're probably all you need to do.
Yeah.
There you go.
We just didn't want to do an episode only on why gardening is great and not tell you some of our thoughts about actually gardening, since that's something that Matt is knowledgeable about. So hopefully this was helpful to everybody.
And if I misspoke here and there, don't kill me. I was crossing the whole spectrum.
Yeah, this was a lot. This was like a short seminar. So hopefully y'all stuck with us. And if you have any other gardening questions, or you're like, I'm doing this specific thing, there's a master gardener over here. You can just, shoot us an email.
I'm off duty.
And I'm sure he'll be happy to help you out.
out.
But we hope that you can find a solution that works well for your family,
Yes.
your own space, your own tastes and interests and time commitments, and budget, and that you can garden with your kids and have this wonderful educational opportunity. So
let's end it the way we always do.
Yep, with what we're into this week. Let's make it short because this is a long one. We're into dominoes, y'all.
Double 6 dominoes. Super cool thing. I was shopping at Walmart. I had some free time. I didn't have any kids. It was amazing. And I was trying to figure out, maybe some new games, something simple. I got picked up
because new games is what we need, y'all.
Yeah. But little things with the 6-year-old on playing some fun games like cards and things like that. And I saw double 6 dominoes. Obviously, there's other types of dominoes, larger versions of them. But I got the double 6, which is the highest value domino is 6 with the break, and then it's 6. I have been enjoying playing dominoes with the 6-year-old like crazy the last week or two, and she has been devouring it. What's really cool about it is more than just playing the game, which she's picked up, is the idea of a lot of times dominoes, you're playing up to a score, like 100, 150, 200, whatever it might be. And there's this tabulating scorecard, and she has been doing vertical addition of, ones and tens place, carrying the ones all the way up to 100 and lovingly keeping the score. And, figuring out what the values are that are left on the dominoes, and then adding those up in her head really fast, and then doing the addition on the scorecard. For me, it's been just a really cheap backdoor way of me getting her to do a bunch of addition problems, and she loves it. And so the double 6 dominoes has been a real hit. We went to my parents this weekend. She played it there as well. She just loves it. She's kind of developed her own little personality of playing, and it's been really, really enjoyable.
Yeah, we've gotten into card games and dominoes things lately. We have all these expensive games, and yet sometimes the simplest thing can be new and exciting to her,
and
because it came off of she hasn't done.
It came off of our interview with Maria Miller from Math Mammoth that's coming out in a couple of weeks. And she talked about how much education is in a deck of 52 cards. And she's absolutely right. In a lot of her books, she references all these card games you can play. And I've really been trying to embrace that. We play a lot of solitaire and things like that. So that was what I was looking for. And I saw the double 6 dominoes. I said, hey, let's give it a try. And I picked up a tin. It was like $7-8. Just been absolutely enjoyable experience. She really latched onto it. So I think she'll be taking money from me soon.
Don't forget about the basics and all the great math opportunities there. So if you have some dominoes, pick them up and give them a shot with your kiddos. Thanks so much for joining us today and making us a part of your homeschool journey. Please engage with us on social media. Join our Homeschool Together podcast group on Facebook and find us at Homeschool Together Podcast on Instagram. We'd love to hear your feedback, questions, and recommendations. Until next time.
Happy homeschooling!